Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished storyteller and coach from India, Tanya Bhattacharya. Tanya, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's a delight being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Tanya, as I mentioned, a business storyteller and a story coach with Storywallahs. So, Tanya, before we get into Storywallahs and coaching, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Oh, okay. So things just happened, Ashutosh. Of course, I believe that there are no coincidences. The universe conspires to get you to where you have to be. But there are people along the way who nudge you in the right direction. And I have been extremely lucky to have encouragers as a part of my life who would nudge me to take chances and try things that I wasn't very confident of trying on my own. You know, it's sometimes when others realize you have a potential and you have self-doubt. I would say, my dad was very instrumental in allowing me back in the day to join a call center. And it wasn't something in an Indian setup and an Indian household and the culture that we come from. It wasn't very encouraged back in the day because I think it was still very nascent in India, the industry. The whole concept of working in the night shifts was quite revolutionary, if I may call it that. Unless you were a doctor or you worked for the airlines or in the hospital, there was no need for you to be out of the house. And a girl at that. But my dad was very open-minded, and he says, and he said to me, why not? My mom was pretty against it initially. I think that was a pivotal, move in life because I hadn't traveled as much until then, and without traveling to get exposed to different cultures, different people, because if you have to work in a call center and you have to interact with customers who are from the United States, from Europe, from England, United Kingdom, Australia, then you have to understand their culture, because otherwise you could be very tone deaf, like catching or understanding accents could be difficult because the Netflix age hadn't dawned 20 plus years ago. So we had like weekend movies that we watched Fridays and Saturday nights on one of the rare channels that would telecast English movies at 9 o'clock at night. So we were still grappling with the whole concept of different accents. So that was one. I think continued my journey in the call center for the longest and kept moving up, got into training. The second big move was when I was petrified of becoming a consultant. There were some personal issues, health-related issues, and I wanted to quit a full-time job and get into consulting, but I was terrified of the idea. But my dad said, why not? You wouldn't know how you do unless you try it. Again, self-doubt prevailed. Why would anybody want to listen to me? But things conspired. There were people in the network who gave an opportunity. I worked for a training organization which was headquartered in Netherlands, but it had its office in Delhi, in India. And I ended up joining them as a business partner, learned a lot there because it wasn't just about conducting workshops and training, but key account management, relationship building, doing training need identification, working with people from across industries. We had a bouquet of training offerings, content offerings, like about 40 plus programs. And then get upskilled on those myself, learn to coach others, the new trainers who were coming in or were new to the industry, teaching them how to do it. So learned a lot there. The third big move was joining Storywallahs because people hadn't heard of storytelling until then. And my mom said, storytelling? Who does that? How do you make money out of storytelling? But then that was great too. So I'm glad that all of these three things happened.
So let's talk about Storywallahs. Tell me about what you do at Storywallahs.
Before I go there, Ashutosh, can I demystify Storywallahs to you?
Absolutely, please.
Because you have a global audience.
Mm.
Now, Storywallahs is a two-part word.
Mm.
Story is, of course, English, and
Yeah.
Wallas is a Hindi word.
Mm.
Now, Wala it typically means a person who does a certain job.
Mm.
Okay, so a newspaper guy would be called a newspaper wala
Mm.
in Hindi. So story wala is just a person who works with stories, and the S is just a pluralized version of
Yeah.
it, and which is why we are story folks.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and it was
Mm.
founded about 10 years ago
Mm.
by the founder of Storywallahs, who's Amin Haq, a brilliant guy. And he is a
I've
huge
interviewed Amin.
motivation. You have, yes, absolutely. So he inspires me every day, and I learn a lot from him. So
Mm.
that's how Storywallahs, that's what Storywallahs means.
Mm.
Now about the second part of the question, tell you what we do at Storywallahs. So, well, considering that we are facilitators, we definitely facilitate workshops for our clients. We have, a lot of corporate clients who seek our services to teach them business storytelling skills, data storytelling, because there's only two ways to kill people in the world. One is by violence, and the other is by dumping a lot of data on them. So we work with narratives, coach them on how do you find and spot the story in your data and then narrate it well. We
Yeah.
work with leaders, and we teach them, how to become more inspiring by leveraging stories in conversations. So we work with corporates. The other part of work that we do is we work with startups and startup founders to get their pitch story right. People who find it most difficult to raise funds are the change makers and NGOs. So we do a lot of work with them, and we help them tell their impact story better. We also coach individuals. We mentor them because when the seeker comes and they say, hey, I want to focus on my own storytelling skills, we do that. We also take up consulting assignments for specialized, for special projects, etc. For example, a lot of our clients reach out to us when they have to tell their innovation stories, and they, for national events or global events, and they have to talk about their innovation and how it's creating an impact and how it's a monetizable idea, etc. So we coach those innovation teams, and that's the kind of work that we do. It's exciting. It's an exhilarating space to be in.
Amazing. So moving forward, what goes into crafting a good story?
The whole purpose of a story is to demystify ideas. A story is something that simplifies the complex. A story is something which should ideally be memorable, and people should be able to recall it. And the only way to do that is to find a connection. Connections are extremely important. In this day and age, people do a lot of corporate mumbo jumbo. They use a lot of jargon. They feel it's very it's great to use words and terminology which is which shows them as experts. But the only problem with expert speak is that expert speak can be extremely technical. And what stories do is that they convert technical or expert speak into human speak. And that's what story's purpose is. So a good story, I would say, is something that connects people, that evokes emotions, that builds common ground. And that's what you would call a good story. Because there are all kinds of, sometimes people tell you a series of events. This happened, and that happened, and that happened. And it still doesn't engage you. So unless you can get people to see what you see and get them to feel what you feel, a story hasn't done its job.
Fascinating. Can the art of storytelling be taught, or are you a born storyteller?
We are all storytellers, because stories are us and we're all storytellers. I truly believe in that. Anything which has existed in the world thus far has existed, thrived, because somebody told a great story about it.
Correct.
The food habits that you have, whether you're a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian or a vegan, it's a story somebody sold you. The political party that you support is a story. How we organize ourselves as people, as communities, these are all stories which have been told. And I think when we were growing up as children, I'm sure Ashutosh would remember running back home from school, eager to tell your parents what happened during the day. We were all storytellers. Thankfully for us in our generation, I think our parents had more time to listen to our stories. Exceedingly, today I see my peers, people around me who are very, they don't have enough time to listen. So we keep cutting our children short. We keep cutting our colleagues short and say, hey, don't tell me a story, get to the point. And in this crazy, insane drive to get to the point so quickly, we're missing the point. The whole point is that we do something because there's a reason, because it impacts people. And if we take the heart out of conversations, then how can stories ever survive? Yes, so stories, we are all storytellers, but it's an art which is forgotten. All we need is a reminder. So yes, stories can be learned and they can be taught. But I believe that before somebody can teach storytelling to anyone, we need a story. We need to be able to spot stories ourselves. We must become keenly observant and look for stories which are panning out around us. You would agree with me, right?
Yeah.
That we are consuming stories from through different channels every day. The newspaper that you read, Netflix series that you're watching, Instagram stories that you're watching, even business presentations and pitches. Well, even if it's a half-hearted attempt, but it is a story that somebody's trying to weave. When somebody asks you to believe in them and they make a very compelling compelling narrative they use, that's also a story. But a lot of times we don't realize that these are stories, and which is why we don't notice if there are patterns. And before we can ask someone, hey, come teach me about storytelling, it's very important to start spotting stories, become observant, and notice those patterns, start connecting the dots, pause and reflect and ask yourself, why did this speak to me? Why did this connect with me? Why do I think it's a good story? And is there, if there's a resonance, then what's the connection? What are the commonalities in great stories? And once we start doing that, then seek a coach, get somebody who can mentor you, show you the tools, techniques, etc.
Fascinating. And what a great response. Thank you. One more question on storytelling, and then I'll move to coaching. Sure. How important are anecdotes in storytelling?
You tell me.
I've written many books. I think it's very important, but I'd love to get your perspective.
Absolutely. Anecdotes are extremely important. I realized that very early on, as a child, in fact, Ashutosh. I'm reminded of this one episode that my mother relayed to us, okay? So I had become this very rebellious young girl in my early teens. And whenever my dad or my mom would propose something, I would go snipping them, like, but, no, but, and it's much later in my corporate journey as a trainer that I realized there was a concept of no, but, and yes, and. Now, these are all fundamentals, and leadership gurus have coined these terms and techniques, etc. But my mom taught this to me in a very different way. And there's an anecdote that she shared that I would like to share with you.
Sure.
My mother's younger sister, the school that she used to go to, she had a classmate who was a very dear friend of hers. Every time my aunt would say something, her friend would go cutting her off, chop, chop, chop. So my mother just said one day, telling us about that friend, and she said, jokingly, everybody in the class would call this girl Shikha Scissors. Her name was Shikha Scissors. So don't be a scissor, see if you can be a tape instead. And so see if you can find connections and you can build on something instead of cutting it off. It will serve you well. And just that anecdote is, see, it's a story. It is so easy to remember. The details, how my mother built the characters up. I felt bad for my aunt when she told me this. And I also realized that Shika had no idea she was being called scissors. And if only she could change her ways. So a lot of times, great advice, good advice, desirable behaviors can be propagated. In fact, in organizations, cultures, the culture of the organization can be propagated through great anecdotes and stories. History will always repeat itself, Ashutosh, either for the better or for the worse. But if we don't tell stories of what has happened and we don't share those anecdotes, then history is lost. And then we don't know which history should be repeated because it's desirable, and what is it that we shouldn't do.
Fabulous. And I've always believed that an anecdote helps people to remember the story, because anecdotes stick in your mind. Thank you. So moving on, Tanya, about to your other role, which is as a coach, let me start by asking you, after a successful corporate career, what made you move to become a coach?
I think even as a facilitator, while I worked in the corporates, there was an element of coaching which was involved, and I think I dabbled with coaching in a to great extent when I worked with a training outfit, which is again headquartered in Netherlands. I was working directly with them. I wasn't working with the India office anymore, and I was working as a coach for Microsoft through them. And so there was this long period of about a year and a half that I took up many coaching assignments. And of course, there was very thorough training that we had to undergo and how to do career coaching, etc. So I actually dabbled with career coaching for Microsoft employees. And I coach people across levels. And I realized that, there's a fine difference between just facilitating something in a classroom and then you lose touch with people, because you could have done a 1-day workshop or a 2-day workshop, maybe have a couple of connects later. But when you become a part of somebody's growth journey over a period of time, say 3 months or 6 months, and when you're available as a coach to give them a listen and work with them as, to have them just bounce their ideas off you. And of course, you would agree that coaches don't need to be experts themselves. And they may not even know so much about the industry and the work, but a coach's job is to get you to seek the answers. And then I realized that it was so much more gratifying. And it was after that, the period that I spent coaching employees of Microsoft, that I figured when Storywallahs happened, that along with facilitation, when we got opportunities to do story coaching, I think it made me do more impact work.
Very interesting. My next question to you is that, given your own background and all the work that you have done in so many different areas, and obviously, as you said a little while earlier, you've been encouraged all along by your father. How have you been shaped by people in your life, and how are they influencing you as a coach today?
I think the first thing is that, Ashutosh, I don't look at one person as a source of all knowledge, because one person cannot be a source for all knowledge. I am generally a curious person, Ashutosh. I am extremely curious as a person. So whenever I meet anyone, I use that opportunity to learn from them. And this is something that I learned from my mother. My mother used to be a homemaker. So she had very limited circle, that people that she would interact with. But our dinner table conversations, Ashutosh, were always about what did you learn today and who did you learn from? And it's amazing how my mother was always the first one to say that whoever she talked to, there was one learning that she had. And then I realized that to be inspired, you don't need one person and and pin all your hopes in them. So become curious and seek opportunities to learn from everybody. So not a day goes by where I don't seek inspiration. And if there are days I'm working from home, and if I'm not done a workshop like during the pandemic, we weren't really stepping out. So unless I'm on a Zoom call conducting a workshop or in a meeting, that's very limited space to learn. So then I would get into conversations with my 10-year-old daughter, who's now 10. She wasn't 10 back then, or read a book or watch something on TV. Sometimes the source of inspiration and learning could come from a dialogue which would be exchanged in a Netflix show. But I think we have so much capacity to learn and to seek if we just open ourselves up to learning. So I think everybody that I interact with shapes me somehow or the other.
Fascinating. I have time for 2 more questions. My next question to you is, as a coach, you would have worked with senior leaders and the younger leaders like the millennials and the Gen Zs who are coming into leadership positions. In your opinion, what are some of the areas these young leaders need to be coached in?
I think exceedingly, now that we are living in a world where the young leaders have become extremely comfortable with distance, working remotely. And when people work remotely, you also know that these days, there's this lingo, they have this cryptic language that they use while texting, shorter, sharper conversations. I think in their, and they may be very comfortable with it. But the older generation, the baby boomers and others, they have that continues to be in the corporate sector still, and they're still working because retirement ages have been pushed further. My own father was working until he passed away at the age of 72. Till the day he died, he had his file open and he was wearing his specs and he was working. So there's no concept of retirement anymore. Now, if we have to connect with people across generations, I think deeper connections need to be forged. So I think one thing that I would expect the millennials, or I hope the millennials and the Gen Z would work on, is seeking stories, sharing more stories, deepening connections. And even in this space where it's absolutely okay to work virtually, but just make time to hear people out, because unless we listen to people, we can't curate our own stories.
Well said. Well said. And my last question to you, Tanya, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own journey and so much learning you've had, what would you say are 3 learnings or 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
Yeah, and I love listicles. Ask me for 3 sharp ones. I would say the first one would be when anyone's curating their stories, their business stories, their work stories, their impact stories, their innovation stories, their pitch stories, whatever kind of stories those are, make them relevant. How do we make them relevant? Find people or groups of people that your audience can relate to. It's so much easier, even if you're talking about a mundane task of pulling reports which are mind-boggling, and still they leave you hassled because there's no insight in it. Talk about a person who's doing that job every single day, and which is why automation is required. Your audience would connect with better. I think a lot of times when people come up with ideas and they want to share, they don't necessarily make it relevant to the audience. So look for that one person and a human story that is relevant and people can identify with it. The second thing would be to tell the truth. Always anchor it in truth. And truth sometimes can have multiple facets. It's like a diamond, a cut diamond, which has so many different angles that you can look at it from, and the light that's reflected is different. So go deeper into investigating the truth. Get credible reports, maybe a Gartner, Bloomberg, whatever, and McKinsey report. Get experts' opinions, but varied opinions. But do thorough research and bring the whole truth. The third is tell that truth well. Because it's not just what we say, but it's also how we say that matters. You share 5 facts with somebody, they will be soon forgotten tomorrow or day after, but you weave it into a narrative, evoke emotions, and use better language. I think vocabulary is something that people need to work on so much more. And vocabulary, not like that somebody has to refer to the dictionary to look up words, but better feeling words, finding better expression. So look for that, not just the right story, but also say it well.
Very interesting. And on that note, Tanya, and your 3 wonderful lessons: make your story relevant, that an audience can relate with. Number 2, you said, was tell the truth in your story, and if necessary, go as deep as possible to get the truth. And the third one, which is so important, is to tell the truth well. I think with these 3 powerful lessons and your amazing journey, thank you for talking to me about your journey, about Storywallahs, about what goes into making a story. Thank you for talking to me about coaching. And thank you for speaking to me. Good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.